Survival. It's the most primal instinct we have. But what happens when escaping death leads to something far worse? In today's episode of Horrible Fates, we dive into the chilling stories of those who survived the impossible, only to face the unthinkable. On December 24th, 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Kepka and her mother boarded Lanca Flight 508, a Lockheed L-188 Electra, flying from Lima to Pucallpa in the Peruvian Amazon. Despite warnings, including from her father, the plane entered a severe thunderstorm around 21,000 feet. After about 20 minutes, a lightning strike struck the wing, rupturing fuel tanks and triggering explosive structural failure. Passengers reported violent turbulence, overhead luggage crashing down, and roaring engines. Julianne later remembered holding her mother's hand until a final flash. Her mother whispered, "That is the end," and the cabin went silent. She plummeted strapped to her seat bench, twisted upside down, through 2 miles of atmosphere. The seat, caught by thunderstorm updrafts and tangled in canopy branches, likely slowed her descent enough to survive. Julianne awoke the next morning, soaked and disoriented, beside her aircraft seat amid dense forest canopy. Though miraculously alive, her injuries were severe. Concussion, fractured collarbone, torn knee ligament, deep leg cuts, a swollen eye. She felt the bone-cold presence of a toddler-thin daylight pressing through jungle noise. Her first thoughts were of survivor's guilt and locating her mother, but the thick forest and her blurry vision made even crawling feel like madness. Julianne recalled, "I lay there for the rest of the day and a whole night, until the next morning." Relying on survival instincts learned at Panguana, where her zoologist parents taught her the jungle's hidden rules, she found a creek and began her trek downstream. She even used her remaining sandal to probe for camouflaged snakes. Her only food was a packet of sweets recovered from the wreckage. She drifted midstream to avoid piranhas and other hidden dangers. Nights were freezing, days blistering, rain relentless, described by her. "Ice-cold drops pelt me. I feel utterly abandoned." On day 4, she stumbled on 3 passenger seats buried in mud, containing bodies. Using a stick, she confirmed none was her mother. Infections worsened. Flies laid maggots in her arm wound. After around 9 days, she found a tiny riverside hut with a battered canoe and a liter of petrol. Recalling her father's remedy, she poured petrol over the wound and pulled out about 35 maggots. An act both agonizing and triumphant. The next morning, her patience was rewarded. She heard voices. 3 local lumberjacks cautiously approached, stunned at the sight of a gaunt, dirt-covered girl with tangled blonde hair emerging from the jungle shadows. Julianne later said, "They thought I was a kind of water goddess." Still weak but composed, she spoke to them in Spanish. "I'm a girl from the Lanca crash. My name is Julianne." Moved by her calm clarity and incredible survival, the men tended to her injuries, gave her food, and transported her by canoe for nearly 7 hours to a nearby logging camp. From there, she was flown to a hospital in Pucallpa, where her father, desperate and fearing the worst, finally embraced the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. In the days that followed, Julianne guided authorities back to the crash site. Her mother's body was found on January 12, 1972, more than 2 weeks after the disaster. Of the 92 people aboard Lanca, Flight 508, 86 passengers and 6 crew, 91 perished. 14 of those initially survived the fall, but died before rescuers could reach them. Investigators later concluded the crash was caused by the crew's decision to fly directly into a dangerous storm, where a lightning strike ignited the fuel tank. Julianne, the sole survivor, returned to Germany later that year, pursued a degree in biology, and went on to earn a PhD in mammalogy, with a specialization in bats. She eventually became the director of Panguana, her family's Amazon research station, in the early 2000s. Shima Hall was born on September 29, 1989, in Alexandria, Egypt, the 7th of 11 children, in a deeply impoverished family. When she was just 8 years old, her life was stolen from her. sold by her own parents to a wealthy family in Cairo for the equivalent of $30. The deal was made to repay a debt. Her older sister had been caught stealing from the family, and Shaima was handed over as compensation. In their Cairo home, she worked from dawn until midnight, without rest or schooling, caring for twin boys and performing endless chores, all while enduring cold discipline and verbal abuse. About a year and a half later, the family moved to Irvine, California, and smuggled 10-year-old Shaima into the United States under false pretenses, claiming she was a distant cousin on immigration paperwork. Her parents were told she would only stay overseas for a few months. Instead, she remained a servant for 2 long years, hidden in plain sight behind the facade of suburban comfort. In Irvine, Shaima's life was one of isolation and hardship. She slept in a small, unfurnished garage room with no windows, just a blanket, a bucket, and a broken light bulb. She was forbidden from speaking English, stepping outside, or attending school. Her daily routine began at 5 a.m. and ended around midnight. She dressed the children, prepared breakfast and tea, scrubbed marble floors, ironed clothing, and obeyed the constant demands of her captors, who called her stupid and occasionally beat her. She earned about $45 a month, though she never saw a single dollar. She had no access to education, medical care, or emotional support, just relentless work and emotional abuse. Everything changed in April 2002, when a neighbor noticed that a young girl never left the house or attended school. The tip led ICE agents to investigate. When they entered the home, they found Shaima, malnourished, exhausted, and understandably hesitant to speak. Her captors had warned her that the police would harm her if she ever told anyone. Once removed from the home, she was placed into foster care, cycling through 3 families over the next few years as she slowly healed, learned English, adjusted to school life, and began to confront the trauma of her captivity. Legal justice followed. Between 2001 and 2007, the federal case against her captors proceeded. Ibrahim received a 3-year prison sentence, and Motalib was sentenced to 22 months. Both were deported after serving their time and ordered to pay Shaima around $76,000 in back wages. In court, Shaima faced her abusers and bravely asked, "Wasn't I a human being too?" In December 2011, Shaima became a U.S. citizen. She settled in Riverside County, California, earned her high school diploma, and began working retail while exploring careers in law enforcement and anti-trafficking work. In 2014, she co-authored Hidden Girl, the true story of a modern-day child slave, with Lisa Wysocki, sharing her journey from enslavement to empowerment. Not every nightmare starts with noise. Some slip in silently before turning deadly. Innocent lives disappear, truth hides behind layers of deceit, and justice arrives far too late. These aren't just crimes, they're haunting turns no one saw coming. Each case unravels a terrifying puzzle, soaked in betrayal, obsession, and the unexpected. They had only just begun their life together. Sonam and Raja were newly married, setting off on a honeymoon in the lush, rain-soaked hills of Meghalaya. On May 20th, they arrived in Cherrapunji, known for its breathtaking waterfalls and serene trails. But on May 23rd, their dream trip took a horrifying turn. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon that day, Raja Raghuvanshi had been struck in the head with a sharp blade and thrown into a deep gorge near Wei Saodong Falls. His body lay hidden for days, slowly decomposing in the thick underbrush. His wife, Sonam, vanished without a trace. When police found the rented scooter abandoned and their luggage left behind, the mystery deepened. Locals reported last seeing the couple with 3 unfamiliar men on a jungle path. Sonam's jewelry, a Mangalsutra, and a ring, had been left behind in the homestay, sparking early suspicion. Phone signals dropped. There were no cries for help, no known threats, no ransom demands, just silence. Search teams combed the forests and gorges. 10 days later, on June 2nd, they found him. broken, decaying, and far from where he was last seen. But even then, Sonam was nowhere to be found. That changed on June 9th, when she suddenly turned herself in at a roadside food stall in Uttar Pradesh. What followed was one of the darkest revelations in recent memory. Investigators pieced together a plan woven in deceit. Behind the scenes, Sonam had been in constant contact with Raj Kushwaha, a man she was, allegedly, involved with before and even after her wedding. Together, they had plotted Raj's end. Raj, along with 3 others, was flown into Meghalaya under the guise of tourists. On that fateful trek, they ambushed Raja, silenced him forever, and fled. The sickening part? It wasn't an impulsive act. It was calculated, rehearsed, and cold. A new groom had walked into a trap set by the one person he thought he could trust with his life. The case sent shockwaves through the country. It wasn't just about love gone wrong. It was about betrayal laced with cruelty, about how a celebration of union became a cover for something unspeakable. For Raja, the trip marked the beginning of married life. For Sonam, it was the final stage of a plan too sinister to imagine. It was just past 5 p.m. on a quiet June afternoon in Islamabad's G13 sector. Sana Yusuf, a vibrant 17-year-old with a smile that lit up millions of screens, was at home celebrating her birthday. The air was festive, her mother and aunt nearby, laughter echoing off the walls. But, within minutes, the scene transformed into chaos. A man entered, calmly greeted the family, exchanged brief words with Sana, then pulled out a weapon and fired. 2 bullets tore through her chest. The celebrations died with her. She collapsed instantly. Her mother screamed, rushing to her side. Her aunt, in shock, thought a balloon had popped, but it was no accident. Sana was gone before she reached the hospital. Her young face, so full of life, now forever frozen in a photograph, would haunt a nation. What made the case even more disturbing was the identity of the man behind the attack. Umar Hayat, just 22 years old, from Islamabad. Someone who had once admired her from a distance, and later turned into her worst nightmare. The news spread like wildfire. A promising student, a rising digital voice, cut down in her own home. But why? For hours, theories swirled. Was it a targeted attack? A robbery gone wrong? A jealous rival? Clues emerged slowly. Her mobile phone was missing. The killer had vanished. But Islamabad police moved fast. Within a day, they traced Umar's location and arrested him. The truth was more horrifying than imagined. Umar wasn't a stranger. He had followed her online, tried to contact her multiple times, and was turned away. He became obsessed. Rejection grew into resentment, and resentment exploded into violence. In his twisted logic, if he couldn't have her, no one should. Public outrage swept across the country. Social media flooded with tributes. Her face, once a source of joy, became a symbol of silenced ambition. Her hometown in Upper Chitral buried her under skies that once inspired her dreams. Islamabad courts began the long march toward justice. Her family, shattered but brave, stood in court and pointed to her killer. Sana's story isn't just about one young life lost. It's about a culture that allows obsession to grow unchecked, that blames the victim for saying no. A tragedy like this wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And the echoes of those 2 shots may never fade. The silence inside the Carroll County home was broken by the sharp crack of gunfire. 2 lives were cut short. Kristen and James Brock were discovered lifeless in their bedroom, blood staining the sheets, their bodies cold before sunrise. What made it even more heart-wrenching was the small, trembling figure of a 6-year-old girl, standing there in shock, the first to witness the aftermath. The emergency call came shortly after. The voice on the other end? Calm, controlled. It was 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick, the couple's daughter. At first, it was seen as a tragedy, a home invaded, a family shattered. But as days passed, whispers began to stir. Sarah's grief played out online. She posted mournful TikToks, begging for prayers, speaking of pain. But it wasn't just the mourning, it was her obsession with attention. She reached out to true crime influencers, offering inside details, suggesting her family's case would make a great story. Not once, not twice. Dozens of messages as if she were promoting a show, not coping with loss. Detectives were puzzled. There were no signs of forced entry, no robbery, no struggle. And Sarah had given a speech at the funeral that, according to some, felt rehearsed, like a performance. Cold, calculated. Her online activity didn't match the image of a grieving daughter. Instead, it painted something far more sinister, something curated. Months passed without charges. Then in July, everything changed. Arrest warrants were filed. Sarah surrendered to authorities, now facing serious accusations, 2 counts of murder and multiple charges of assault. The investigators, along with federal agents, had uncovered what they described as a mountain of evidence, digital traces, behavioral patterns, and inconsistencies in her story. Still, her family remains divided. Her grandfather insists she's innocent, calling her arrest a mistake. Others, especially extended relatives, question how someone so close could be so emotionless, so detached. What began as a tragic loss turned into something far more disturbing. A teenager accused of orchestrating a deadly plan, then allegedly shaping the narrative like a twisted influencer campaign. No confirmed motive, no weapon found. Just silence, suspicions, and a case still unraveling. In the gallery of unthinkable acts, this one etches itself into a darker corner, where masks fall, truth blurs, and the line between victim and villain disappears behind a screen.